Welcome to California View. I'm Kyle, and here I want to talk about cities in California and the city in the Eastern U.S. that's most like it. So I'll be looking at a full range of cities in the state, different size ranges, and see where in the eastern half of the country it's most similar. So places with similar characteristics, a similar vibe. And of course, there's going to be plenty of things about each place that makes them unique, but there are certain characteristics that make a lot of these places quite similar, and some of these are not exactly East Coast, but all of these are certainly eastern half of the contiguous U.S. in either the central or eastern time zone. So let's take a look at a full range of cities in California and what cities in the eastern half of the U.S. are most like them. I'm going to start with Los Angeles, the largest city and metro in the state and the second largest metro in the country, and it's by far larger than the third largest, which is Chicago. So as such, it might be easy to say that LA is the most like New York, but other than the large population, I don't think the vibe or the feel of LA is the same as New York. So for LA, I think the equivalent city on the East Coast is Miami. LA and Miami are similar in that they have a lot of ultra mega billionaires living in giant houses on or near a beach as opposed to a big penthouse and a high rise. But you also have a lot of visible wealth, a lot of flashy wealth, a lot of Ferraris and Lamborghinis on the street you might see. And I think the sunny weather in each place plays a huge role in what makes these places similar. Again, a lot of mega wealthy want to live there, but also has an influence on the just greater culture for us regular peons that live there because we want to still look good when we're outside enjoying that sunshine. So LA and New York might be more similar in population, but I do think Miami is much more like LA in terms of just how it feels. And that's a good segue because I do think for San Francisco, the closest equivalent on the East Coast would be Manhattan. You have much denser population, much denser street network, more people walking and riding public transit. Things are significantly less spread out. There's less of a car culture than either LA or Miami. But because neither of these places are known for their abundant sunshine, you don't have the same type of beach culture and more flashy wealth that you see in some of the sunnier places. So although there are certainly many things about San Francisco and Manhattan that are very, very different, if you like one, you'll probably like the other and you'll feel right at home in that dense network of streets just walking around. Where I see San Diego in relation to California is that it's the other big city in the southern half of the state, but it's nicer than the one that is much bigger. And as a result, I think that's much more similar to Boston on the East Coast, where it's that other big city in the Northeast, but it is nicer than the one that is much bigger. And in general, when you think of some of the nicest big cities in the U.S., San Diego and Boston are going to be two of the ones that come up right near the top. They both are intricately tied to the sea and their ports. They both have a lot of colonial history, whether it be Spanish or English. And overall, they're just a little more laid back than either L.A. or New York. So you're in that same part of the country, a big city, but it isn't quite as big and hectic as that one that's much more well known. Now for Sacramento, it's the state capital, and I believe the capital in the eastern half of the U.S. that is the most like Sacramento is Oklahoma City. Now you might be thinking Oklahoma City isn't exactly eastern, but it is central time zone and it is in the eastern half of the contiguous U.S., even if just barely. But the reason why I think Oklahoma City is very similar to Sacramento is that the cities themselves are pretty similar size. Sacramento's metro is larger, but not by a whole lot, but they're also considered kind of boring, kind of cowtown type things, even though they are pretty big cities. Both of these cities have an NBA franchise as its only major pro sports team, and they each have a nice college town about a half an hour away where you have a large research university. UC Davis about a half an hour west of Sacramento, and the University of Oklahoma about a half an hour south of Oklahoma City in Norman. They each have a historic area downtown right there along the river where you have some entertainment options with restaurants and shops. Some of the tourists go there. And even though these aren't just cow towns, well, you can get yourself some good cowboy hats and boots in both of them. So now I'm going to compare some more suburban type areas starting with Orange County. This is a major population center that is mostly suburbs directly adjacent to a much larger city. So in that regard, I think Orange County is much like Long Island, New York. Both of these areas are known for being predominantly wealthy, mostly middle class, upper middle class, and super wealthy. The poor population is a relatively small part of the population in both. You have a lot of super rich with big beach houses in both. You have a few just regular beach towns that are super crowded on summer weekends. And ultimately, these two places are a large population of just suburbs. So even though it is essentially just suburbs, they were mostly individual towns that grew and they kind of just got sucked into the larger metro area. So many of these suburbs do have their own individual downtown and their own unique flavor, but they are still a bedroom community for many people that live or work in the much larger city and the much larger, whether it be New York or LA. Keeping it in Southern California, I'm looking at the Riverside San Bernardino area, otherwise known as the Inland Empire. This is a twin county metro area that has a lot of people that is very close to a large metro, but isn't right there in it. And as a result, I think the most similar metro on the East Coast would be the New Haven Bridgeport area in Connecticut. And these are both considered their own metropolitan areas, but they're so close to the much larger cities of LA and New York that they're often considered part of the greater combined metro area. But at the same time, these are both much cheaper places to live within their greater metro areas because, let's be honest, these are less desirable places to live. Both Riverside and New Haven have a large research university there with UC Riverside and Yale, but the other ones, San Bernardino and Bridgeport, are both kind of rough. And even many parts of both Riverside and New Haven are pretty rough as well. So this isn't quite as glitzy and glamorous as some of the more coastal areas in California or some of the more ritzy kind of big house areas along the Hamptons or some of the areas along the coast. Going back up to the Bay Area, I'm looking at San Jose. This is a very large city that's part of a twin city major metro area. And as a result, I think it's very similar to Fort Worth, Texas. And yes, just like Oklahoma City, this isn't exactly Eastern, but I do think San Jose and Fort Worth are very similar in many ways. First, individually, these are each huge cities with about 1 million people each, but they're usually overshadowed by the other big city in that metro. These being San Francisco and Dallas, but in the case of San Jose, it's actually bigger than San Francisco, but it is still usually overshadowed by the city. But with that being said, San Jose and Fort Worth are usually considered nicer than either San Francisco or Dallas. They're much more suburban feeling, have a lower crime rate than the other city in the metro, and their downtowns are okay, but not super exciting. But nonetheless, they are safer and cleaner than either San Francisco or Dallas. Keeping it in the Bay Area, I'm going to Oakland, and where Oakland fits in is that it's a large city in a large metro area, but even though the greater metro might be considered pretty nice, Oakland itself is considered one of the worst cities in the entire country, so I think that's very similar to Baltimore on the East Coast. Baltimore is a big city in a region that's otherwise considered a pretty nice part of the country in which to live, but Baltimore itself is considered one of the worst cities in the country. And Oakland and Baltimore have a much more industrial past than either San Francisco or Washington. You have a big harbor there, the port is much busier than the other city, and just has a more blue-collar feel to it. You do have a significant water feature right downtown Lake Merritt in Oakland and the Inner Harbor in Baltimore, and there are significant pockets of wealth in both of these cities, but both of these cities are mostly kind of rough. So in Oakland, you might trip on a needle. In Baltimore, you might get stabbed, but at least Baltimore has its football and baseball teams. Okay, so now I'm going to start comparing some of the smaller metros in the state, starting with the Central Coast going north to south. So here I'm going to Santa Cruz. This is kind of a weird, funky place right there on the coast, and I think it's very similar in many ways to Asheville, North Carolina. Tell me which one of these I'm talking about. You got hippies, weirdos, burnouts, skaters, punks, musicians, artists, beautiful scenery, a lot of tourists, and expensive homes. And they each have a major tourist attraction that doesn't really fit in with the vibe of the city. You have the beach boardwalk in Santa Cruz, which is a very family-oriented kind of carnival right there on the sea. And in Asheville, you have the Biltmore Estate, this regal, just giant mansion, just beautiful, opulent wealth. But these cities are much more well-known for just their kind of hippie, weirdo musician culture. And I really like both of these cities. They're part of a dying breed in the U.S. There aren't many of these left, so I hope each of these places are able to maintain its character, even though it does come with plenty of negatives as well. Heading down the coast, I'm now going to Monterey, which is on the same Monterey Bay as Santa Cruz, but the climate is much different. It's often cloudy in Monterey, and it's certainly going to be cooler there than Santa Cruz. And so with that, I feel that Monterey is very similar to Portland, Maine. Winters will be quite different in each of these, but the vibe of both Monterey and Portland is pretty similar. It isn't known for its beach culture. It's much more laid back. It has a nice historic downtown with some cool shops. It has a nice waterfront with some cool seafood restaurants. No one goes to these two cities to party or hang out on the beach, but anyone that's been to these places loves them because they're just wonderful places to be. They can each be overrun with tourists on summer weekends, but I can see why tourists want to go there. It's just a really great place. But in the shoulder seasons and in the off season, especially in Portland, it's going to be much quieter and just really nice to enjoy that town. Continuing south down the coast, I'm going to San Luis Obispo County, and this is the only county along the central coast where the main city isn't right there along the beach. There's a nice historic downtown. You have one of the old missions there. You have a big college there, but it's still usually considered coastal, so I think it's very similar to Wilmington, North Carolina. So even though it's usually considered coastal, it isn't right there on the beach. You have a river going through there, but you also have a large university with UNC Wilmington. And somewhere else where they're very similar is that being in a coastal county, you do have close by beach towns that are really nice. For San Luis, you have Pismo Beach. For Wilmington, you have Wrightsville Beach, but these are both large beaches, large swaths of sand. And I feel that both of these cities are very representative of a traditional beach coastal town in their states. They both have plenty of tourists, but the visitors that go to these places are usually regional and not from far off parts of the country or international. Going one more county south along the coast, I'm going to Santa Barbara. This is another one of the older coastal cities with a Spanish colonial history. You have a nice downtown, some beautiful old buildings there. It can also be pretty posh, much more expensive than some of the other parts of the Central Coast, and very similar to Charleston, South Carolina. You have a very beautiful waterfront there, some gorgeous old architecture, old colonial history. And even though each of these cities has nice beaches nearby, they're most well known for their city-type things, the history, the downtown, the cool urban amenities. But because these are each arguably the nicest and fanciest cities in the general coastal region in which it lies, you have a lot of national and international big money buying up real estate there. Now, both Santa Barbara and Charleston do retain their unique cultural heritage, but you do have a lot of the skyrocketing housing values that are going up because so many people from outside the region are buying up some of the cool old homes there. But hey, if you've got big money in the U.S., there aren't too many places better than either Santa Barbara or Charleston. Okay, so now I'm going into the San Joaquin Valley. Starting from the north, I'm going to Stockton. Normally, when you think of Stockton, you think of negative things, high crime, high poverty, and just all the horrible things that can go on in a city, but just exacerbated. So I think with a city of that size, it's very similar to Youngstown, Ohio. It's in a region that's kind of a greater combined megalopolis-ish type thing. It's not in the Cleveland, Akron, Canton metro, but it is kind of close by. So Stockton isn't in the San Francisco Bay Area, but it's pretty close by. They're much more blue-collar oriented, a lot of industry in both. A lot of shipping type stuff in Stockton, a lot of manufacturing in Youngstown. But many jobs went away, a lot of things got abandoned, a lot of things just got worse and worse in these cities. They each have a university there to kind of prop up the local economy, but that isn't enough because these are larger metro areas that don't really have a whole lot going on, but there is a lot of urban blight, a lot of high crime, a lot of poverty. Continuing south in the San Joaquin Valley, I'm now headed to Fresno, an often maligned city just known for kind of negative things, often the butt of many jokes. It's a cow town, it stinks, there's cattle everywhere. Well, sounds a lot like Wichita, Kansas. Now, I don't think either one of these are as bad as their reputation, but they also aren't the most exciting cities in the country either. They each have a couple interesting neighborhoods and a decent-sized university. You have the foothills of the Sierra Nevada just east of Fresno. You have the Great Plains Nature Center just north of Wichita. So these might not be the two most exciting cities in the country, and they both have a relatively high crime rate as well, but they're also not nearly as bad as people say. Next, I'm heading out to the desert and Palm Springs. This is a very upscale place with many of the people living there being up there in age. A lot of retirees, a lot of golfers, but it's a very nice place. And that all sounds a lot like Naples, Florida. Very similar, a lot of old people that like golf. Naples calls itself the golfing capital of the world. Both Palm Springs and Naples have a small historic downtown, but most of the development has been just large homes, just very well planned out areas for retirees. So if you have a lot of money and you're looking for that Del Boca Vista lifestyle, do check out Palm Springs or Naples. And just for a little bit of bonus content, I thought I would use my hometown of Visalia to see where it compares to an eastern city. And for that, I'm going to Hickory, North Carolina. It's about the same size as Visalia. They're in a metro area of about 400,000 people, but the town doesn't feel anywhere near as large as that because the other towns that make up the metro are separated, so there's plenty of open space between it. But they have a cute little downtown, nice main street, some cool murals along some of the buildings downtown, but they do have a very similar feel. You're both close to some mountainous areas. You have the Great Smoky Mountains and the Sequoia National Park really close by, but you're also reasonably close to the beach. You're a lot closer to the beach from Visalia, but Hickory does have a very similar feel to my hometown of Visalia. So the first time I was there, I was like, oh, this feels kind of like home. So that's a look at a handful of cities in California and the place in the Eastern U.S. that I feel is the most like it. But I do want to quickly go over a couple other ones right here, one being Eureka. This is a small town along the coast. It's pretty blue collar, a little rough around the edges, but there's nothing like that on the East Coast. Everything along the Atlantic Ocean or the Gulf Coast is either going to be pretty nice or a big city, so nothing quite like Eureka. And then also Barstow. So this is out in the Mojave Desert. If you're not from California, it's kind of the laughingstock town of the state. Everybody hates it. It's just really gross. And I think it's most similar to some of these really downtrodden parts of Appalachia, like southwestern West Virginia or eastern Kentucky. Just really rough areas, high unemployment, a lot of drug abuse. So just really some major issues with some of the problems you see in rural America right now. But that's kind of what Barstow is, some of those really poor parts of Appalachia. So I just think it's really interesting being from California, but now living in the East for so long that I still see so many places that are similar. So I can go somewhere, it can be hot and humid. The geography is a little bit different, but it still has the same kind of feel and vibe to places I know out west. So, and there are plenty other places I could talk about. I mean, I can make this video go very long talking about smaller towns and other places in the state, and some of the smaller towns in the East, they're like that. But I mean, this could go on forever, but I hope you would like this one. So give me a thumbs up, subscribe to this channel, and check out my main channel, Geography King, where I go over all kinds of stuff like this, but it has to do with more than just California. So, and also Mirway Maps sponsors my videos. This is a really cool map. You can check out the link in the description to get that map, or plenty of other ones. So nice coupon code for a discount. But yeah, California View channel. Thanks for watching.